"Doug, come here quickly." He was staring at her and even blushed a little. At 6:68 Joanne was already waiting for his call, and the next weekend she went on a date with him. 2 months passed. Doug made her a proposal, and they started living together. His mother, Mrs. Poust, was not too happy with the outcome of their hasty affair, thinking that her son was still too young and that the experienced girl had simply seduced him. But her son just laughed in response to his mother's concerns. He was happy with Joan, and since she got pregnant, he was ready to carry his beloved on his hands. As a child, Doug had mumps and was afraid he wouldn't be able to become a father, as his mother warned him several times. But all his worries were in vain, and the spouses eagerly awaited the arrival of their firstborn at the remaining months, until the birth passed quickly, and soon the new father was holding his son. Doug named him Oliver, just as his mother had dreamed. After giving birth, Joanne felt very weak, so she did not object to the baby's name or move to Mrs. P's house. However, it was not very pleasant for her to live there. Mrs. Poust was practically dissatisfied with everything all the time, and the baby did not evoke warm and tender feelings from her, which could be expected from a grandmother. Rather, she just tolerated him. But the reason was that the first look at the newborn, Mrs. Poust convinced herself that the child did not look like her son, and no assurances that he was just too young to look like anyone else. It convinced her. "I'm sure he's not your son," she constantly whispered to Doug. "Look, he doesn't look like you or her, AER. He is so fair-skinned, and his eyes are nothing like yours. You were born with eyes as dark as a blueberry, and your skin was tanned, but this baby is so white." "Mom, don't be ridiculous," Doug replied. "Oliver is my son, and I love him." A time passed, and the young family still had to live in Mrs. Poust's house. Owen begged Doug to move out and live separately, but he just shrugged it off. He had a new job with a good position and had to travel on business trips constantly, leaving his wife and son in his mother's care. Then he started returning like a stranger, and Joan gradually began to suspect something was wrong. Doug's mood swings, his indifference, followed by increased attention to her with bouquets of flowers and gifts that no longer pleased her. Seeing all this, Joan got afraid that Doug was cheating on her. Icy 20 evening, while picking up his shirts from his travel bag, Joanne noticed a trace of lipstick on the It was like an electric shock to her. Her worst suspicions were confirmed. As with trembling hands, Joan reached for her husband's phone. Why did Doug lock it? He had never done that before. What is he hiding? Joan wanted to understand whether she was becoming paranoid, trying to catch her husband cheating. Maybe it was just because she had been at home with the baby for so long and gained weight, losing her confidence. Perhaps she was not as attractive to him anymore. Owen, like many women, excused her husband looking for the cause in herself, but she could not sleep peacefully until she finally confirmed her suspicions or denied them. Doug was still affectionate with her, but he became somewhat distant. He practically did not leave his phone unattended, and if there was a sudden call, he immediately left the room. And then one day, Joanne got lucky. Her husband had just finished a phone call when his mother called him and he left, forgetting his mobile on the nightstand next to the bed. Joan grabbed it as if a hungry person would grab a piece of bread. She wanted to know the truth, whatever it was. There was nothing suspicious among the calls, except that the name of someone named Andrew appeared too often, and Joan decided to take a risk. She pressed the call button, but instead of a male voice, she heard a woman's voice. "Yes, Doug? You forgot to say something, darling. Did you change your mind about coming?" Then silently pressed the reset button on her phone and carefully placed it back in its place. She felt like she had fallen into a stupor. Her life seemed to have instantly shattered into a million tiny shards. What will happen to us now? How could this be happening? Odd did not notice the change in his wife. He was sharing some plans with her, but Joan could not understand their meaning. She simply could not hear anything. Her husband suddenly seemed completely unfamiliar to her, and her entire life with him ended abruptly, like a dream. "I want to go visit Heidi tomorrow. Miss Oliver and I will stay with her for a couple of days. She misses me." They were gathering the necessary documents and hoped to find a job and firmly decided to leave her mother-in-law's house with or without her husband. "Where have you been, and why are you dragging your child around with you?" Mrs. Puss began to reproach her. "I was with Heidi. She needed my support." Joan lied, blushing, "And I don't need support here, do I? I can't ask for my son. He's always on the road. You're not much better. You'd better help me around the house, not comfort anyone," her mother-in-law persisted. Joan didn't argue. She was ashamed of her mistake, so she kept quiet. She hoped that her random affair would remain in the past and eventually stop jawing at her conscience with guilt. But things happened differently. Harry got Joan's phone number with Heidi's help, and Joan didn't understand why she agreed to meet him. The new acquaintance was a well-known artist and a creative person in life. Joan found him incredibly interesting. However, he had once experienced a tragedy. Shortly before his wedding, he and his bride crashed their car. The bride died on the way to the hospital, and doctors fought for Harry's life for a long time. He survived and spent long months in a hospital bed where he started to drink. That's what happens to people sometimes. They study or work somewhere and don't even suspect what talents lie within them until their lives turn around or circumstances arise that give them the opportunity and time to listen to themselves and show their previously dormant abilities. And Harry had both. Joanne was very similar to his dead bride, Bonnie, and he was ashamed that he had treated her like that evening. He literally used her family problems and drunkenness. And to him, it was as if he had not been with Joan that night, but his dead bride had come to him to console him. But over time, he realized that he thought more and more about Joan as herself, not as a girl who reminded him of Bonnie. A former pain of loss and guilt, like a black thundercloud pouring rain, was going further and further beyond the horizon, and a light sadness and incipient trepidation appeared in his soul, and it was reflected in his paintings. And all this was reflected in his paintings. Occasionally, Jo mentioned her sister. At home, her mother-in-law still grumbled. Her husband was just as indifferent, and he had distanced himself. distanced himself from her even more over the year, gave birth to a boy. That's when they began to search for this woman, putting all their efforts into it. And it turned out that finding her was not that easy, as the address listed in the documents was no longer her residence. They didn't know where she had gone. The neighbors told them that the family was disadvantaged and that no one took care of the children. "She's a drinker," said a former neighbor, and her husband was an alcoholic too. They seemed to have gone somewhere to earn money, and the youngest boy was with them, while the older one was taken away by Child Protective Services. It took months to search, because Harry had taken Joan and Oliver to live with him, was sure of success, even when Joan was almost desperate. They also looked for Oliver's biological father, whose information Harry was able to obtain through a friend who served with the authorities. Soon, they found out that the family moved in with the husband's sister, where they drank together and repeatedly got into trouble with the police. The child's mother had recently died, and the father was caught stealing again, so Joan's own child was left in essence an orphan and probably lived with his aunt. This was such a horrifying thought. Frayne didn't want to wait a second. She was afraid that something bad could happen to her own son at any moment, or he could be taken away by strangers like his older brother. She and Harry went to the specified address on the same day. The door was not locked. Owen crossed the threshold and recoiled, struck by the stench that hit her nose. The apartment was filled with the stench of unwashed bodies, alcohol, and garbage. A picture among all this nightmare, there was nowhere to see the child. "Tommy?" She already knew that her own son was named Tom, and now as gently as possible, not to scare the boy, she called him by name for the first time. "Tommy, please respond. What the hell are you doing here?"
A disheveled, drunk woman appeared in the doorway. Her jacket was greasy, and her hair hadn't seen a comb in a long time.
"What, Tommy?"
What are you talking about? Did you come for your man? Which one is yours, huh? And she kicked the unconscious man lying on the floor. This one, maybe?
"No, I need a boy named Tommy, your nephew. This parasite that the little rat probably hid somewhere again. Hey, have you seen the brat? She kicked the sleeping drunk again. What do I need him for?" muttered the man, most likely wandering around the station again. "I'll teach him a lesson when he gets back. He will learn his lesson when he gets back, so he won't be wandering around." The man lay back down on the floor and snorted. "Go to the train station and find your Tommy," the woman snarled fiercely before slamming the front door shut. Joanne couldn't believe what she was hearing and seeing. How could fate take her own little baby and throw him into such a hellish situation? But Harry was more focused than ever. He picked up the completely weakened Joan, and soon his car was already speeding them to the nearest train station. "We need to ask the beggars. If Tommy appears at the station not for the first time, they already know him," Bree said as he began searching for someone who could tell him about the boy. Most of the beggars hurried to leave when he started questioning them about the little beggar, but an old man agreed to show him where to find the boy. "He often hides here when his aunt beats him. They often beg together. You won't hurt him, will you? He's a good kid. He just didn't have any luck in life," the child's friend explained. The boy was sleeping on blankets. He couldn't understand anything in his sleep and only rubbed his eyes with his dirty fists. Why does the beautiful woman call him so affectionately Tommy? And why does she swear to him that she is his mother? He thought, bewildered. My mother died. I only have a dad, but they put him in jail again. I'm hiding from my aunt here? The boy replied,
Son, your mother is alive. I am your real mother. You were just taken away from me, Joan said, looking at the child with tears in her eyes.
The boy looked at Joan's kind, tearful face with disbelief, and somewhere deep down in his soul, he wanted her words to be true. He'd suffered so much in this life that he wanted to believe with all his heart that his mother would not run away from him now. He would finally be loved and taken care of.
Joan hugged his fragile body and pressed him to herself.
Their hearts beat loudly in unison, and they both felt that nothing would separate them now. Joan took the little boy away, and she and Harry achieved recognition of their relationship through the court. Tommy never met the angry aunt again. He met Oliver, and Joan was happy. Of her boys, the most beloved and dear little people in the world quickly became friends. They felt like real brothers, boys born on the same day, even though they had different parents. They found true maternal love and care in Joanne, and Harry was always there, becoming not only a husband but also a father to Tommy. Stringwingly. He's not only husband to Joan, but also the best father to these different but so dear boys to his heart. String 2, Eda D-Teen. He's not only husband to Joan, but also the best father to these unique and dear sons to his heart.